The reward I got for fixing that otherworldly craft was something far beyond payment or recognition. What the visitor from beyond the stars revealed to me about Our Lady, about the Blessed Mother herself, was a truth so profound it rewired everything I thought I understood about prayer, about faith, about the very fabric of how this world operates. I'm not spinning you a yarn here. I'm not feeding you religious platitudes you've heard 1,000 times from the pulpit. What I'm about to share with you is something that's been buried, hidden away from ordinary faithful people like you and me, a missing piece that once you grasp it will make your entire existence click into place, like the final turn of a spanner on a stubborn bolt. But I must warn you now, this knowledge comes with a price. It will illuminate corners of your life that have been dark for decades, but it might cast shadows on beliefs you've held sacred since you were a wee child sitting in the parish hall learning your catechism. If you're genuinely ready to confront what you've been told is absolute truth, if you're willing to see Our Lady in a way the church never taught you, then stay with me now, because what Siobhan O'Sullivan witnessed in the fields of West Cork was not the conclusion of a strange encounter but the beginning of a revelation that's been frozen in time, waiting for someone brave enough to receive it. Let me tell you how it all began, and I swear on my grandmother's grave and on the Holy Mother herself, every word of this is true. Siobhan O'Sullivan was lying in her narrow bed in her cottage outside Skibbereen, listening to the Atlantic storm hammer against the stone walls, when the sound happened. It wasn't thunder, though God knows there was plenty of that rattling the windows. This was different, deeper, a massive thud that seemed to shake the very earth beneath the cottage foundations, as if something impossibly heavy had come down hard on the fields behind her property. At 54 years old, widowed for 7 years, and living alone with nothing but her 2 border collies and a dozen sheep for company, Siobhan had learned to trust her instincts about strange occurrences. The dogs were going mad, barking and howling in a way she'd never heard before. Not the usual fox alarm or the excited yapping when the postman came round, but something primal, something that spoke of genuine fear. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and told herself it was probably just an old oak finally giving up the ghost after centuries of standing, that she'd sort it out come morning when the storm passed. The rain was lashing so hard against the windows it sounded like handfuls of gravel being thrown, and the wind was screaming through the gaps in the doorframe with that particular West Cork fury that makes you grateful for solid walls and a good roof. She eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep, the dogs still whimpering at the foot of her bed. Morning arrived with that crystalline brightness that only comes after a fierce storm has scrubbed the sky clean, the kind of light that makes every blade of grass shimmer like it's been dipped in holy water. Siobhan rose, her joints protesting as they always did these days, put the kettle on for her morning tea, and went to the kitchen window to survey whatever damage the night had wrought. She stopped cold, her hand halfway to pulling back the faded curtain. There was something out in the back field, something that absolutely should not be there, something that made no earthly sense whatsoever. It was large, metallic, catching the early sun in a way that hurt to look at directly, reflecting light, in colors that seemed somehow wrong, somehow not of this world. "Sweet Mother of God," she whispered, her Kerry accent thickening with shock, as it always did when she was distressed. "What in the name of all that's holy has landed in my field?" She fumbled for her reading glasses, the ones she kept on the string round her neck, and peered more intently through the watery old glass. The structure for it was clearly some kind of structure. Was roughly the size of her garden shed, but the shape was all wrong, too smooth, too perfect, with curves that seemed to flow into each other like liquid metal frozen in motion. And there was movement beside it, a figure, someone or something working at what appeared to be an opened panel. And even from this distance Siobhan could see that whatever was out there was not human, not even remotely human. Her heart began to hammer in her chest, that terrible pounding that made her think of the angina the doctor in Skibbereen had warned her about, told her to avoid stress and excitement, which was a laugh really, because what was more stressful than seeing something impossible in your own backfield on a Tuesday morning in October? She gripped the edge of the kitchen sink, her knuckles going white, and for a long moment she simply couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare. The figure straightened up, and even at this distance she could see it was too tall, too thin, the proportions all wrong, the head too large for the body, the limbs too long and angular. It turned, slowly, deliberately, and though Siobhan couldn't make out details from here, she had the overwhelming sensation that it was looking directly at her, that it knew she was watching, that it had perhaps been waiting for her to wake and see. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab her mobile phone and ring the Gardaí in Skibbereen, to do something sensible and normal. But instead she found herself pulling on her wellies, the green ones with the hole in the left toe that she kept meaning to replace, and wrapping her old cardigan around her nightdress. "I've gone completely mad," she muttered to herself. But her hands were already on the back door handle, already turning it, already pushing the door open into the crisp morning air that smelled of rain and earth and something else, something sharp and metallic that made her nose wrinkle. She walked across the wet grass, her wellies squelching in the mud, the dogs pressing close against her legs, still whimpering but following her anyway, because that's what dogs do. They follow even when they're terrified. As she got closer, details emerged that made her stomach lurch. The craft, for that's what it had to be, some kind of craft, was covered in symbols or markings that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than her eyes could properly process. The metal, if it was metal, seemed to hum with a very faint vibration, and the air around it felt different, charged somehow, like the moment before lightning strikes. And the figure, God help her, the figure was definitely not human. It was crouched beside the craft, its impossibly long fingers. 6 of them, she noted with a distant part of her mind that was still trying to catalog and make sense of things, working at some kind of glowing panel that pulsed with a soft blue-green light. The skin, if you could call it skin, was a pale gray blue, like skim milk with a drop of ink, and completely hairless. The head was elongated. The eyes, sweet Jesus, Mary and Joseph, the eyes were enormous and entirely black, no whites at all, just depthless black pools that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Siobhan stopped about 15 feet away, her breath coming in short gasps, her chest tight with fear and wonder and something she couldn't quite name. The being turned its head, that slow, deliberate movement, and those impossible eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel suddenly naked, exposed, as if every secret she'd ever kept, every sin she'd ever committed, every doubt she'd ever harbored was being read like the morning newspaper. They stood like that, woman and otherworldly visitor, staring at each other across a stretch of muddy Irish field while her sheep bleated in the distance and a crow cawed from the stone wall. Then the being raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, palm outward in a gesture that transcended species and worlds, a gesture that said as clearly as words, "I mean you no harm, I am not your enemy." But Siobhan's nerve broke. She turned and ran, her wellies slipping in the mud, her cardigan flying open, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst right through her ribs. She made it back to the cottage, slammed the door, shot the bolt, and stood with her back pressed against the wood, breathing like she'd just run a marathon. She stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, her back against the door, listening to her own ragged breathing and the frantic beating of her heart. The dogs had scattered to their beds in the corner, tails between their legs, watching her with worried eyes. Slowly, carefully, Siobhan moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. The being hadn't followed her, thank God and his holy mother. It was still there by the craft, but now it had sat down in the mud, its 2 long legs folded in a way that looked uncomfortable, its oversized head bowed as if in defeat or exhaustion. And something about that posture, something about the slump of those narrow shoulders, touched something deep in Siobhan's heart. She'd been a nurse for 32 years before retiring, had worked in the casualty ward at Cork University Hospital, and she'd seen that same defeated posture in patients who'd been told there was nothing more that could be done, in people who were lost and frightened and alone. "You're being a fool, Siobhan O'Sullivan," she said aloud to her empty kitchen. "That thing out there could be dangerous, could be anything." But even as she said it, she was filling the kettle again, was putting tea bags in the pot the way her mother had taught her, was pulling on a proper coat over her nightdress because if she was going to do something this monumentally stupid, she was at least going to be dressed for it. 20 minutes later, with a mug of hot tea in one hand and her husband's old hurley stick in the other, because she wasn't completely mad after all, Siobhan walked back out into the field. The being looked up as she approached, those fathomless eyes tracking her movement, and she stopped a safe distance away, far enough to run if needed, close enough to see. "Right then," she said, her voice shakier than she'd have liked, "I don't know what you are or where you've come from, but you look like you're in a spot of bother." The being tilted its head, and then something extraordinary happened. A voice not spoken aloud but somehow inside her head, clear as a bell ringing in an empty church, said, "Thank you for returning. I did not expect courage after fear." Siobhan nearly dropped the tea and the hurley stick both. "You're in my head," she gasped. "How are you in my head?" The voice came again, calm and somehow gentle despite its alien origin. "Forgive me. It is the only way I can communicate with your species. I have no vocal apparatus as you do. No way to make the sound your language requires. My thoughts transfer directly to your consciousness through quantum resonance." Siobhan had no idea what quantum resonance was, but she understood enough. "So you can read my mind then? Know everything I'm thinking?" A pause. "Then, I receive only what you project strongly. Your fear, your courage, your kindness in bringing hot liquid, which I appreciate though I cannot consume it, your deeper thoughts, your private self. These remain yours alone unless you choose to share them strongly." Something about that reassured her, though she couldn't say why. She set the tea down on a flat rock and lowered the hurley stick slightly, though she kept it in her hand. Where have you come from? And what in the name of God are you doing in my field in Skibbereen?" The being gestured to the craft with one long-fingered hand, and Siobhan noticed that the fingers ended not in nails but in something that looked almost like small pads, like a gecko's feet. "I come from a star system your astronomers have catalogued but not named, approximately 63 light-years from this planet. I am what you might call an observer, a documentarian of civilizations. My craft sustained damage in an atmospheric electrical storm while conducting scans of this region. I attempted to land safely but crashed here instead. I mean no harm to you or your world. I wished only to repair my vessel and depart. Shaban's mind was reeling, trying to process the impossibility of what she was hearing. 63 light years, star systems, other civilizations. It was like something from those science fiction films her late husband Dermot used to watch on the telly. And you can fix it, can you? This ship of yours. She could feel the hesitation before the answer came. Alone, no. The primary energy conduit is damaged beyond my ability to repair with only internal tools. I need someone who understands mechanical systems, who can improvise with available materials. I observed your property before the crash. You have a workshop, tools, materials. You understand how things fit together, how systems work. I saw the tractor you repaired last month, the intricate work you did on the engine. That was different, Shaban protested. That was just a Massey Ferguson, not some spaceship from 63 light-years away. But even as she said it, she was curious, professionally curious in the way that had made her good at her job, always wanting to understand how bodies worked, how systems functioned, how to fix what was broken. Please, the voice in her head said, and there was something vulnerable in it, something desperate. I have a family, 3 offspring who wait for my return. I have been gone from them for 14 of your months. They will think me lost. They will mourn. I need to go home. And that did it. The mention of children waiting, of a family incomplete, of someone lost and alone and desperate to return to those they loved. Shaban had been alone since Dermot died, knew the ache of it, the hollow space where someone should be, and she couldn't bear to think of anyone, human or otherwise, suffering that way if she could help. All right, she said, making a decision that would change everything. All right, I'll take a look. But we're getting that thing into my barn first. Because if Father Brendan from the parish sees it, he'll either call the guards or start performing an exorcism. And neither of those will help your situation. Getting the craft into the barn was easier than she'd expected. The being who asked her to call it something she could pronounce and settled on ALB, which was close enough to its actual designation, explained that the craft was constructed from a metamaterial that was far lighter than it appeared. Something about molecular structure and gravitational manipulation that went completely over Shaban's head. Using her old tow rope and a good deal of careful maneuvering, they managed to get it through the barn doors and hidden from casual view. Once inside, with the doors shut and the autumn light filtering through the dusty windows, Shaban got her first proper look at the damage. The craft had a panel open along one side, revealing what looked like nothing so much as a cross between a computer circuit board and human circulatory system. All glowing lines and pulsing nodes and crystalline structures she had no names for. Explain to me what I'm looking at, she said, pulling on the reading glasses. ALB moved beside her, careful not to crowd her, and began to point with those long fingers. This is the primary energy distribution matrix. Your planet's electrical discharge, your lightning, overloaded it. This crystalline component here, it regulates the flow of power from the core to the propulsion system. It is cracked, you see. Siobhan did see. Running through what looked like a crystal the size of a hen's egg was a hairline fracture. And even she could tell that was bad news. Over the next 4 days, Siobhan O'Sullivan worked harder than she had since her nursing days, and she learned things about the universe that made her head spin and her faith wobble in ways that were both terrifying and exhilarating. She learned that the craft's power source was something called a zero-point energy converter, that it didn't burn fuel but extracted energy from the quantum foam of space itself. She learned that ALBS species had been observing Earth for thousands of years, watching humanity develop, recording, documenting, but never interfering. Bound by what they called the primary ethical directive, she learned that there were dozens of species in the local galactic neighborhood, some of whom had visited Earth, most of whom hadn't, and that humanity was considered young, volatile, but promising. And she learned, on the third evening as they worked side by side repairing a servo mechanism that controlled the craft's directional systems, that ALB's people had witnessed something that would shake her understanding of her faith to its very foundations. They were taking a break, Siobhan nursing a mug of tea and Elle doing whatever it was Elle did to rest when she asked the question that had been building in her since the first day. You said you observe civilizations, document them. Does that mean you've seen our history, our past? Albest's huge eyes turned to her, and she felt the affirmative before the words came. Yes, we have observed your species for approximately 12,000 of your years. Since you first began to develop agriculture and permanent settlements, we have recordings of your development, your civilizations, your religious movements. Siobhan's heart began to beat faster. Religious movements? You mean like Christianity? The church? A pause, then, yes. We observed the formation of your dominant religion with great interest. It was a crucial point in your development. Siobhan set down her tea with shaking hands. Does that mean you saw her? Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Another pause. Longer this time, and she could feel something like careful consideration in it. We observed the woman you call Mary. Yes. We observed her throughout her life, from her birth in Nazareth to her death in Ephesus. We observed what she taught, how she lived, and how her teachings and her role were interpreted and reinterpreted by those who came after. The barn seemed suddenly too small, the air too thin. What do you mean interpreted? Are you saying the church got it wrong? ILB made a gesture she couldn't quite interpret. Not wrong, precisely, but incomplete, simplified. The truth of what Mary represented, what she tried to show people, was far more profound than the religious doctrine that was built around her. She understood something about the nature of reality, about the power of consciousness to shape physical existence, that most humans still do not grasp, and that understanding, that knowledge, was deliberately obscured because it was dangerous to those who sought to control others through religious authority. Shaban felt dizzy, her Catholic upbringing warring with the impossible revelation being offered. "Show me," she heard herself say. "If you have recordings, if you really observed her, show me. I need to see." Ayub was silent for a long moment, and Shaban could feel something like concern, like warning, in that silence. "If I show you, if you truly see what we recorded, it will change you. You cannot unsee it. You cannot return to the comfortable faith you had before. The woman you have prayed to your entire life is real, but she is not what the church taught you she was. She is far more powerful, far more important, and the truth of what she tried to teach is something that will make you question everything. Are you certain you want this?" Shaban thought of the decades of rosaries, of Hail Marys recited until the words lost meaning, of prayers sent up to a gentle figure in blue and white who smiled from holy cards but never seemed to answer. She thought of the empty years after Dermot died, of the prayers for comfort that brought none, of the desperate requests for help that echoed into silence. And she thought of that defeated posture she'd seen Ayub sitting in that first morning, the universal language of someone lost and alone. And she understood that perhaps she had been lost and alone too, praying wrong, believing wrong, understanding wrong. "Show me," she said firmly. "Whatever it is, I need to know." Ilby moved to the craft and touched a sequence of points along the intact panel that glowed in response. The air in the center of the barn began to shimmer and distort, like heat rising off a summer road, and then suddenly there was an image, three-dimensional, solid-looking, floating in the dusty space between the workbench and the old plow. A woman stood there, or rather a projection of a woman from 2,000 years ago, and Shaban's breath caught in her throat. She was younger than the icons portrayed her, perhaps 19 or 20 years old, wearing a simple homespun robe the color of good earth, her dark hair covered with a plain cloth. But it was her face that struck Shaban most, not the serene, otherworldly face of church statues, but a real face, intelligent and strong, with laugh lines around the eyes and a mouth that looked like it smiled often. This was a woman who had lived, who had known hardship and joy and everything between. She was speaking to a small group of women, her hands moving expressively, her posture animated and engaged. "Is that really her?" Shaban whispered, not trusting her voice. "Is that truly Mary?" Ilby's response was gentle. "Yes, this is a holographic recording from the year you would call 54 AD. She was living in Ephesus at this time, in a small community of followers of her son's teachings. She was teaching a group of women about prayer, about manifestation, about the power they possessed within themselves." Shaban moved closer to the image, mesmerized. She could see every detail, the weave of the fabric, the dust on the hem of the robe, the way Mary's eyes lit up as she spoke. "I can't hear her. Is there no sound?" Ilby touched another control and suddenly there was sound, but not in Aramaic or any language Shaban would understand. Instead, Aelbe's voice came into her head, translating in real. "She is saying, the power is not outside you, sisters. The kingdom of heaven is not a distant place where we will go after death. It is here, now, within each of you. When I stood at the wedding in Cana and the wine ran out, do you think I prayed to an external God to fix the problem? No. I held a knowing in my heart that there was abundance, that there would be enough, and I felt the gratitude for that abundance before it appeared. I held the frequency of the miracle until reality shifted to match it." Shaban felt her knees go weak and grabbed the workbench for support. The wedding at Cana. That was Jesus' first miracle, but she's saying it was her, that she did it. Ilby's tone was patient, explanatory. "Your scriptures focused on the son because your culture at that time could not accept a woman holding such power, teaching such things. But those who were there knew the truth. Mary was the one who understood the principles of conscious manifestation, who had developed the ability to hold thought and emotion at such a high frequency that physical reality reorganized itself to match. She tried to teach this to others, especially to women who were considered lesser in that society, to show them their own power." The scene shifted, and now Mary was alone, kneeling in what looked like a small garden, her hands outstretched, her face tilted toward the sky. But Shaban noticed immediately that this was not the posture of begging or supplication. There was nothing subservient about it. Mary's expression was one of absolute certainty, of joy, of connection to something vast and profound. "Watch her energy field," Elb said, and the image shifted slightly. Now there was a glow around Mary, starting at her heart and spreading outward in waves of golden light that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. This is not special effects or religious artistry. This is an actual electromagnetic field generated by focused consciousness and elevated emotion. Every human generates this field, but most generate such weak, chaotic fields that they have no power to affect reality. Mary had learned to generate a field so coherent, so powerful, that it could influence matter at the quantum level. Shaban stared at the pulsing light, at the woman at the center of it who looked nothing like the plaster statues but everything like someone real, someone who had discovered something extraordinary. How did she learn this? The scene shifted again, showing Mary as a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, sitting with an older woman who looked like her mother, both of them with their eyes closed, hands on their hearts. She was taught by her mother Anne, who had been taught by her mother, a lineage of women who had preserved ancient knowledge about the power of consciousness, about the true nature of prayer. This was not the prayer of asking, of begging an external deity for favors. This was the prayer of declaring, of knowing, of holding the vision of what you desire until it must manifest. But we're taught to pray the rosary, Shaban protested, feeling her carefully constructed worldview crumbling like week-old soda bread. We're taught to ask Mary to intercede for us, to beg her to pray to God on our behalf. Are you telling me that's wrong? Ilby's energy felt almost sad. Not wrong, but backwards. Mary tried to teach people that they had direct access to the creative power of the universe, that the divine was not separate from them but flowing through them. She tried to teach that prayer was not about asking but about aligning your consciousness with what you desire, and holding that alignment until it materializes. But after she died, after her son died, the men who built the church around their teachings could not allow such power to remain in the hands of ordinary people, especially women. So they changed the narrative. They made Mary into an intermediary, a gentle intercessor, someone to pray to for help from an external god. They took away her power, and in doing so, they took away yours. Siobhan felt tears streaming down her face, though she hadn't realized she was crying. But I've prayed to her my whole life. Every night, every morning, the Hail Mary, the Rosary, all of it, and nothing changed. Nothing got better after Dermot died. I prayed and felt nothing, received nothing. Was I doing it wrong all this time? The hologram shifted again, and now Siobhan was looking at herself. It took her a moment to understand what she was seeing, but then she realized it was a simulation, Elbry creating what she must have observed. There was Siobhan kneeling beside her bed in her nightdress, rosary beads in her hands, head bowed, and even from outside herself she could see how small she looked, how defeated. And then she heard her own voice, and shame flooded through her. Holy Mary, Mother of God, please help me. I'm so alone. The house is so empty without him. I can't sleep. I can't eat properly. Everything hurts. Please ask your son to help me. I can't do this alone. She watched as the simulated version of herself continued to pray, and Elb added the energy field visualization. Siobhan gasped. Where Mary's field had been golden and pulsing with coherent light, her own field was a muddy gray-brown, full of dark spots, flickering weakly, and with every word she prayed it grew darker, heavier, more chaotic. No, she whispered. No, that can't be right. But Aleb's voice in her head was inexorable. Every word of your prayer was coded with scarcity frequency, with victimhood, with powerlessness. I'm alone. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Everything hurts. I can't do this. You were not praying. You were decreeing exactly what you did not want. You were taking the pain you felt and amplifying it, sending it out into the quantum field as a powerful intention. And the universe, which is not moral or judgmental but simply responsive, they gave you exactly what you were decreeing. More loneliness, more pain, more inability, not because you deserved it, not because God wanted you to suffer, but because that is the frequency you were broadcasting. Siobhan wanted to argue, wanted to deny it, but she was looking at the evidence, seeing the dark, muddy field around her simulated self, and something deep inside her recognized the truth of it. Then how was I supposed to pray? What should I have done? The image changed back to Mary, this time showing her in a different moment. She was older now, perhaps in her 40s, and she was teaching again, but this time to a mixed group of men and women. I'll be translated as Mary spoke, her face animated with passion and certainty. When you desire something, when you need something, do not pray from the place of lack. Do not say I need or I don't have or please give me. These words vibrate at the frequency of absence, and you will manifest more absence. Instead, give thanks as if you have already received. If you need healing, say thank you for this perfect health I am experiencing. If you need abundance, say thank you for this overflow of provision in my life. If you need companionship, say thank you for the loving presence that surrounds me. Feel the gratitude as if it is already true. Hold that feeling in your heart, let it fill your entire being, and then trust that the universe must rearrange itself to match the frequency you are holding. The image froze on Mary's face, on that expression of absolute conviction, and Siobhan felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked and frozen since Dermot's funeral 7 years ago. But the situation was real, she said, her voice breaking. I was alone. I was in pain. How could I pretend I wasn't? Ilby moved closer, and for the first time since they'd met, reached out one of those strange long-fingered hands and gently touched Shaban's shoulder. The touch was surprisingly warm. Not pretending, choosing. Reality is not fixed, Shaban. It is fluid, responsive to consciousness. You were alone and in pain, yes, but by focusing on that aloneness and pain, by rehearsing it in your prayers every night, you locked yourself into that frequency. If instead you had chosen to focus on the connection you desired, on the peace you wanted, on the healing you sought, and if you had felt genuine gratitude for those things as if they were already present, your energy field would have shifted, your frequency would have changed, and slowly, incrementally, your reality would have begun to shift to match. Not magic, not divine intervention, simply the way consciousness interacts with the quantum field of possibility. Shaban was silent for a long time, processing, feeling the weight and the liberation of what she was being told. Finally, she asked, the Rosary, the Hail Mary prayer. Pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. We're asking her to pray for us. Is that wrong? ILB tilted its head in that almost human gesture. It keeps you in the position of powerlessness. It makes you a petitioner, someone waiting for help from outside. Mary wanted to teach you that you don't need an intermediary, that the power she accessed is the same power available to you. She wanted you to understand that you are not separate from the divine, that the same creative force that moves through all existence moves through you. When you pray to her to intercede, you miss the entire point of what she tried to teach. The fourth day of repairs brought something else entirely. Shaban had been working on reconnecting a series of what Alb called neural pathways in the ship's navigation system. Delicate work that required steady hands and careful attention. When she asked the question that had been nagging at her since the hologram revelations, ILB, you said Mary tried to teach this to others. This way of prayer, this understanding of consciousness and manifestation. But if she tried to teach it, why did it disappear? Why don't we know about it? Ilb was silent for a moment, and when the response came it carried a weight of something like sorrow, because it was deliberately suppressed. After Mary died, after Yeshua her son, whom you called Jesus, was executed, there was a power struggle among those who claimed to follow his teachings. Some wanted to preserve what Mary had taught, wanted to continue her lineage of empowerment, wanted to teach people that they held divine power within themselves. But others, particularly the men who would eventually form the early church, saw the danger in such teachings. People with power, people who understand they can manifest their own reality, cannot be controlled. They do not need priests to intercede for them. They do not need elaborate rituals or hierarchies. They become free, and free people are dangerous to institutional power. Shaban felt a cold not forming in her stomach. So they changed the teachings deliberately. They knew the truth and hid it. The affirmative was clear. In the year 325 AD, at a council in a place called Nicaea, the men who controlled the church made official decisions about what would be considered true doctrine. They debated, they voted, they determined by majority vote what you would be allowed to believe. And the teachings about conscious manifestation, about the power within, about Mary as a teacher and not just a vessel, these were declared heretical. The texts that contained them were burned. The people who taught them were silenced or killed. And over centuries, the truth was buried so deeply that almost no trace remained. It can't be right, Shaban protested, though her voice lacked conviction. The church is supposed to preserve truth, not destroy it. ILB's response was gentle but firm. Institutions preserve themselves, Shaban. That is their primary function. And the truth Mary taught was too dangerous to preserve because it would have destroyed the very structure of ecclesiastical power. So they kept parts of it, the parts that could be controlled. They kept prayer, but made it supplication instead of declaration. They kept Mary, but made her meek and mild and powerless except to beg her son on behalf of others. They kept the concept of miracles, but made them rare, special, the domain of saints, and those chosen by God, not the natural result of elevated consciousness available to anyone. They gave you just enough truth to keep you faithful, but removed all the parts that would have made you free. Shaban set down the tools she was holding and sat heavily on the workbench. Mother of God, if this is true, if any of this is true, then everything I've believed, everything I was taught as a child, everything Father Brendan preaches from the pulpit every Sunday, it's all been a lie. Ild came closer. Not a lie, an incomplete truth. The divine exists. Shaban, the creative force you call God is real. Mary was real, her son was real, their connection to that force was real. But they were not unique in having access to it. They were simply humans who had learned how to use what every human possesses. They were teachers trying to show others the way, and those teachings were taken and twisted into a system of control. The hologram activated again, showing a different scene now. A group of men in robes, sitting in a grand hall, arguing passionately. This is the Council of Nicaea, Ilib explained. Watch what they are debating. The scene played out, and though Shaban couldn't understand the language, Ilb translated, the men were arguing about the nature of Christ, whether he was divine or human or both. And in the midst of the debate, one man stood and spoke about the dangerous Gnostic teachings that claimed all humans held a divine spark, that claimed Mary herself had taught practices of manifestation and conscious creation. These teachings must be declared anathema, the man declared. If the common people believe they can directly access divine power, If they believe they need no church to intercede, we will lose all authority. The faith will fracture. Chaos will reign. For the good of the church, for the stability of the faith, these teachings must be condemned. And Shaban watched as the men voted, as the majority raised their hands in agreement, as the decision was made to erase from official doctrine everything that would have empowered ordinary believers to understand their own divine nature. She felt sick, felt betrayed, felt angry in a way she hadn't felt since she'd watched them lower Dermot's coffin into the cold ground, and the priest had talked about God's will, and she'd wanted to scream that God's will seemed terribly cruel. "Show me something else," she said quietly. "Show me Mary doing something. Show me her actually manifesting, actually changing reality. So I know this isn't just philosophy or theory." Ilab seemed to consider, then adjusted the hologram. The scene changed to a small house, simple and poor, and Mary was there with several other women. One of them was clearly ill, lying on a mat, her breathing labored, her skin pale and slick with fever sweat. Mary knelt beside her, and Shaban watched intently. First, Mary simply placed her hands gently on the sick woman's forehead and chest. But she wasn't doing anything, wasn't praying aloud, wasn't performing any ritual. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and deep, and on her face was that same expression of absolute certainty Shaban had seen before. "Watch their energy fields," Elby said, and the visualization shifted. Mary's field blazed golden, pulsing with coherent light, and as Shaban watched, that light began to extend toward the sick woman. The sick woman's field was weak, flickering, full of dark patches, but as Mary's light touched it, it began to change. The dark patches lightened, the flickering steadied, the whole field began to pulse in sync with Mary's, and as it did, the woman's breathing eased, her color improved, and her eyes opened, clear and aware. Mary opened her eyes and smiled, spoke gently to the woman, helped her sit up. The woman was healed, not over days or weeks, but in minutes, right there in front of witnesses. How Shaban breathed. How is that even possible? Ilby's explanation was patient. Mary raised her own consciousness to a frequency where disease cannot exist. Disease is simply energy vibrating at a low, chaotic frequency. Perfect health is energy vibrating at a high, coherent frequency. By holding herself at that high frequency and extending it to the sick woman, Mary literally raised the vibrational rate of the woman's cells until they matched the pattern of perfect health. The illness could not continue to exist at that higher frequency. This is not magic or divine miracle in the way your religion teaches. It is applied consciousness, quantum mechanics in action. Mary understood that thought and emotion are not ephemeral. They are energetic forces that directly affect the physical world at the most fundamental level. Shaban was quiet for a long time, watching the hologram as Mary helped the healed woman to her feet. As the other women exclaimed in wonder and joy, finally she said, "If this is possible, if any of this is really possible, why doesn't everyone do it? Why isn't everyone healthy and happy and manifesting everything they desire?" The answer came swiftly. Because it requires absolute mental discipline. It requires maintaining elevated emotion and positive focus for extended periods. It requires catching and redirecting every negative thought before it gains power. It requires unshakable faith that you are worthy of what you desire and that the universe will provide it. Most humans cannot maintain that discipline for even an hour, much less consistently. Your minds have been conditioned for millennia to expect scarcity, to focus on problems, to rehearse worst-case scenarios. Breaking that conditioning takes work that most people are unwilling to do. "So I've spent 54 years programming myself for scarcity," Shaban said bitterly. 54 years of doing it exactly wrong. "And now you're telling me I can change it, but it will take work I might not be capable of." Ilby's energy shifted, and if an alien being could feel compassion, Shaban felt it now. "You are capable. You repaired my ship, which required learning completely new systems, understanding alien technology, improvising solutions with limited resources. If you can do that, you can reprogram your own consciousness." Mary did it. She was not born with special powers or divine gifts. She was born human, like you. And she learned through practice and discipline and an unshakable determination to understand truth rather than accept comfortable lies. Shaban looked down at her hands, oil-stained and calloused hands that had spent 3 decades healing bodies in the casualty ward. Hands that had held Dermot's hand as he died. Hands that had just spent 4 days repairing technology from another star system. Perhaps these hands could do one more impossible thing. "Teach me then," she said, looking up at those fathomless black eyes. "If you're going to leave, if you're going to go back to your family 63 light years away, then before you go, teach me something practical, something I can do tomorrow, something concrete that will prove to me this works." Ilby moved to the ship and retrieved something, a small crystalline object that pulsed with soft blue light. "Hold this. It is an amplifier, a training tool. It will help you focus your intention while you are still learning. In time you will not need it, but for now it will assist." Shaban took the crystal. It was warm, almost alive feeling, and it pulsed in her palm like a tiny heartbeat. "Now," Elb said, "think of something small you wish to manifest, something specific enough that you will know if it appears, but small enough that your doubt will not overwhelm your intention." Shaban thought for a moment. All right. My sister Mered lives in Galway. We haven't spoken in 6 months because of a stupid argument I can't even remember the details of now. I want her to ring me. Tomorrow I want to see her name on my mobile phone. ILB's approval was clear, good, specific, personal, emotionally meaningful. Now, do not ask for her to call. Do not hope she will call. Do not wonder if she will call. Instead, feel grateful that she has already called. Feel the joy of seeing her name on your screen. Feel the relief of reconciliation. Feel it as if it has already happened, as if you are remembering something wonderful rather than hoping for something uncertain. Shaban closed her eyes, the crystal warming in her hand, and tried to do what Alb instructed. At first it felt ridiculous, feeling grateful for something that hadn't happened, but then she imagined it vividly. Saw Mered's name on her mobile screen. Imagined answering and hearing her sister's voice, that particular voice that sounded so much like their mother's had. Imagined the relief and joy of making peace after 6 months of stubborn silence. And as she held that image, that feeling, something shifted. The warmth in her chest that had been small and tentative grew stronger, spread outward. And for just a moment she felt absolutely certain that her sister would call, not as a hope but as a knowing. The way you know the sun will rise or the tide will turn. She opened her eyes, slightly breathless. I felt it. Just for a moment, but I really felt it. That certainty. ALB's energy radiated satisfaction. Yes, that is the state Mary maintained constantly. That absolute knowing. If you can hold that feeling, if you can return to it throughout tomorrow whenever doubt creeps in, the call will come. The universe will arrange circumstances to match your frequency. Siobhan wanted to believe it, wanted desperately for it to be true. But 5 decades of conditioning whispered that it was nonsense, wishful thinking, delusion. As if sensing her doubt, Elb added, the test will come tomorrow. But understand, Shaban, this is not about whether manifestation works. We know it works. We have observed it functioning across hundreds of civilizations. The test is whether you can maintain the frequency long enough for it to work. Every time you doubt, every time you think it probably won't happen, you are sending out the opposite frequency and canceling your original intention. The work is not in the asking. The work is in the sustaining. That night, lying in bed with the crystal on her nightstand pulsing softly, Shaban tried to practice what she'd learned. Instead of her usual prayer, the one that had brought no comfort for 7 years, she tried something different. She placed her hand on her heart, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for the loving presence that surrounds me. Thank you for the peace that fills my home. Thank you for the health that flows through my body. Thank you for the abundance that provides for all my needs." The words felt strange in her mouth, felt almost presumptuous, but she forced herself to feel them, to imagine they were true, and something small but real shifted in her chest, a tiny warmth that hadn't been there before. The next morning she woke early, made her tea, and went to check on the ship. ILB was doing final preparations, running diagnostic tests that made the craft hum and glow in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "I will depart tonight," ILB said when Shaban entered the barn. "The repairs are complete. The systems are functional. I can finally return home." Shaban felt a surprising pang at that, had grown oddly accustomed to the alien presence, to the impossible conversations, to having someone who understood things she was only beginning to grasp. "Will you be all right? The journey, you're sure it will hold together?" Ilbed's amusement was palpable. "Your repairs are excellent, crude by our standards, but solid and functional. You have a gift for understanding systems. In another life you would have made an excellent engineer." They spent the day doing final checks, and Shaban found herself glancing at her mobile phone every few minutes, hoping to see Mered's name, then catching herself and trying to return to that feeling of certainty she'd held the night before. By noon nothing had happened, and doubt began to creep in like cold fog. By 3 o'clock she was certain it had been nonsense, alien philosophy that didn't work in the real world. By 5 o'clock she'd stopped checking her phone and was focused entirely on helping ALB prepare for departure, telling herself she'd been foolish to hope. And then, at 6:20, as the October sun was setting over the fields and painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, her mobile phone rang. She pulled it from her pocket, glanced at the screen, and her heart stopped. Mered, her sister's name glowing on the screen, the phone buzzing in her hand. For a moment she just stared at it, unable to move, unable to breathe. "Answer it," Alb said gently. With shaking hands, Shaban answered Mered. Her sister's voice came through, familiar and tentative. "Shaban, I don't even know why I'm ringing, really. I was just sitting here this evening and I couldn't stop thinking about you. About how daft we've been. 6 months of silence over something neither of us can probably even remember now. I'm sorry. I should have called ages ago. Can we talk? Can we put this behind us?" Shaban's eyes filled with tears. Yes, of course we can. I've missed you terribly. I should have called too. I was being stubborn and proud, and they talked for 20 minutes, making peace, making promises to visit, reconnecting the bond that had been strained but not broken. When Shaban finally ended the call, she looked at ILB, her face wet with tears. You knew it would work." ALB's response was matter. "No, I knew the principle worked, but I did not know if you could maintain the frequency." "You doubted. I felt your doubt throughout the day, but you also kept returning to the feeling. You practiced, and just enough of your consciousness held the intention for just long enough that reality shifted to accommodate it. Your sister felt an inexplicable urge to call you. That was not random. That was the quantum field responding to your sustained intention. Shaban sat down heavily, still holding the phone like a precious relic. It really works. God above, it actually works. I manifested this. I made this happen. And with that understanding came another, larger realization that nearly overwhelmed her. If she had manifested this, if consciousness and intention really did shape reality, then every moment of her life, every circumstance she'd found herself in, good and bad, what was the result of the thoughts and emotions she'd been broadcasting? She had not been a victim of cruel fate or divine neglect. She had been, all along, the creator of her own experience, creating unconsciously, creating from fear and scarcity and grief, but creating nonetheless. I did this to myself, she whispered. All those years alone, all that pain. I created it by focusing on it, by rehearsing it in my prayers every night. I made it real by believing in it so completely. I'll be moved closer. Yes, but Shaban, if you created suffering through unconscious manifestation, you can create joy through conscious manifestation. The power works both ways. You are not a victim. You are a creator. And now that you know, now that you understand, you can choose what you create going forward. That night, as darkness fell and the stars emerged in the clear West Cork sky, Shaban helped Aleb move the craft out of the barn and into the field. The ship hummed with power, its surface rippling with light, and Shaban felt both loss and liberation, watching it prepare to depart. What will you do now? Aleb asked. Now that you know what Mary really taught, now that you understand your own power. Shaban looked up at the stars, at the vast impossible distances between them, and thought of the Blessed Mother, not as a plaster statue or a gentle intercessor, but as a woman who had understood something profound and had tried desperately to teach it. Before her words were twisted and buried, I'm going to practice, she said finally. I'm going to learn to hold the frequency like she did. I'm going to manifest the life I want instead of the life I've been unconsciously creating. And maybe, if I get good enough at it, I'm going to teach others, especially the women in the parish who pray and nothing changes, who feel abandoned by God when really they're just praying wrong. Someone needs to tell them the truth. ILB's approval radiated warm and strong. Mary would be pleased. This is what she wanted, a lineage of women passing on the knowledge, empowering each other, refusing to accept powerlessness. You will face resistance. The church will not welcome your teachings. Those who profit from your dependence will try to silence you. But you have the crystal. You have the knowledge. And most importantly, you have proof that it works. Shaban touched the crystal in her pocket, felt its reassuring pulse. I don't care if Father Brendan approves. I don't care if the bishop himself condemns it. I've spent 54 years praying wrong, living wrong, understanding wrong. I won't waste whatever years I have left doing the same. Mary tried to teach truth and they buried it. I won't let it stay buried. Not in my own life. Not if I can help it in others' lives too. The ship rose slowly, silently, defying gravity with technology that looked like magic but was simply science Shaban didn't yet understand. ILB's final message came clear and strong. Remember, manifestation is not about what you say. It is about what you feel. Words are meaningless without the emotion that matches them. Feel gratitude. Feel certainty. Feel the joy of already having what you desire. Hold that frequency as often and as long as you can. And when you falter, when you slip back into fear or doubt or scarcity thinking, forgive yourself and return to the high frequency. This is the work of a lifetime, Shaban. Mary did it. You can too. The craft descended faster now, with becoming a point of light among the stars, and then it was gone, leaving Shaban alone in her field with her 2 border collies and the October wind and a truth that changed everything. She walked back to the cottage, made tea, and sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and pen. At the top of the page she wrote what Mary really taught and began to list everything she'd learned, not for herself alone but for the women she would teach, for the daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters who deserved to know that they were not powerless, that prayer was not begging, that the divine was not external but flowing through them always, waiting only for them to understand and align with it. The weeks that followed were harder than Shaban had expected. Understanding a principle and living it consistently were 2 entirely different things. She would wake each morning, place her hand on her heart, and practice the gratitude that assumed abundance already present, and for those 5 or 10 minutes she would feel it, that warmth and certainty that reality was shifting to match her intention. But then the day would intrude with its bills and its aches and its evidence of limitation, and the old thought patterns would creep back in like weeds in a garden. I can't afford that, my back is getting worse, I'll probably be alone forever. Each time she caught one of these thoughts, she would stop, sometimes mid-sentence if she was speaking aloud, and deliberately replace it. Money flows to me easily, my body is healing and growing stronger. I am surrounded by loving relationships. At first it felt absurd, felt like lying to herself, but she persisted because she had seen Mayred's name on her phone screen. and knew that impossible things could manifest when you held the right frequency. Small things began to change first. A check arrived in the post, a tax refund she'd forgotten she was owed. Arriving the same week, her boiler had broken down and she'd been worried about the repair cost. Perfect timing, or manifestation. She chose to believe the latter. A neighbor she barely knew stopped by with a basket of vegetables from his garden, more than he could use himself. Arriving the day after she'd practiced gratitude for abundant, healthy food. Coincidence, or reality responding to frequency? Again, she chose to believe. But the bigger test came 6 weeks after Ayob's departure. Shaban had been practicing consistently, had filled 3 notebooks with observations about her thoughts and emotions, and the small manifestations that followed. And she felt ready to try something larger. She wanted community, wanted connection, wanted to share what she'd learned with others who might benefit. So she began, cautiously at first, mentioning to women at the parish hall after Mass that she'd been exploring new ways of praying, ways that seemed to bring more tangible results. The reception was mixed. Some women were curious, asked questions, wanted to know more. Others were scandalized, told her she was flirting with heresy, that prayer was not about results but about submission to God's will. And Father Brendan, when word reached him, was decidedly not pleased. He called her into his office after Sunday Mass, his expression stern and troubled, and told her in no uncertain terms that what she was teaching was dangerous, was not in line with church doctrine, and could lead vulnerable women astray. Prayer is supplication, Mrs. O'Sullivan, he said, his Cork accent thickening with agitation. We ask God for mercy and grace. We don't demand or decree or manifest. That's New Age nonsense, and it has no place in Catholic teaching. Shaban had sat across from him, this man who had buried her husband and baptized half the children in Skibbereen, and she had felt the old instinct to defer, to apologize, to back down and accept the authority of the priest. But then she remembered Mary's face in the hologram, that expression of absolute certainty and power, and she remembered that the men at Nicaea had voted to suppress exactly this knowledge because it threatened their control. With respect, Father, she said quietly but firmly, I've prayed your way for 54 years and received nothing but empty words echoing in an empty church. I've prayed the new way for 6 weeks and seen my life begin to change in measurable ways. I'll not be going back to powerless begging when I've tasted what it means to create with intention. Father Brendan had sputtered and warned and threatened to speak to the bishop, but Shaban had stood her ground, and when she left his office she felt lighter than she had in years, as if she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Word spread, as word always does in small Irish towns, and within a month Siobhan had a small group of women meeting in her kitchen every Wednesday evening, 8 of them ranging in age from 26 to 73, all of them curious, all of them tired of prayers that seemed to disappear into an uncaring void. She taught them what AOB had taught her, what Mary had tried to teach 2,000 years ago. She taught them about energy fields and consciousness and quantum responsiveness, though she translated it into language they could grasp, into metaphors of seeds and gardens and light. She taught them to catch their negative thoughts before those thoughts could manifest more negativity. She taught them to pray with gratitude for what they desired as if it had already arrived, to feel the emotion of having rather than the emotion of lacking. And she taught them that they were not separate from the divine, not powerless creatures begging for scraps from a distant god, but extensions of creative consciousness with the same power Mary had wielded, the same power that had manifested wine at Cana and healing for the sick and provision for those in need. Some of the women took to it immediately, reported small manifestations within days, phone calls from estranged relatives, unexpected money, improvements in health conditions that had been chronic for years. Others struggled, found it too difficult to maintain positive focus, slipped back into habitual worry and complaint. But all of them, every single one, reported that even when they couldn't perfectly hold the high frequency, even when they faltered and doubted, the simple act of trying, the simple awareness of their own thoughts and emotions, changed something fundamental in how they experienced their lives. By Christmas, 4 months after ALB's departure, Siobhan's small group had grown to 15 women, and they'd had to move their meetings to the community hall because her kitchen could no longer hold them all. By Easter of the following year, there were 32 women attending regularly, and rumors of the group had spread beyond Skibbereen to neighboring parishes. Some called them heretics, whispered about New Age infiltration of the Catholic community. Others called them wise women, keepers of ancient knowledge that the church had tried to bury. Siobhan didn't much care what they were called. She cared only that women who had spent decades feeling powerless were beginning to understand their own creative capacity, were beginning to see that prayer was not begging but declaring, that faith was not blind hope but certain knowing, that the Blessed Mother they had prayed to all their lives had been not a passive intercessor but an active teacher of truths, too dangerous for patriarchal institutions to preserve. One evening in late May, as bluebells carpeted the fields and the long Irish twilight stretched toward 10 o'clock, a young woman named Aoife, who had been attending the group for 2 months, shared a story that brought tears to every eye in the hall. She had been trying for 3 years to conceive a child. had endured fertility treatments and disappointment and the monthly grief of failure, had prayed countless rosaries begging Our Lady for the gift of motherhood. Nothing had worked, and her doctors had begun suggesting she accept that biological children might not be possible. But after joining Siobhan's group, after learning to shift from "please give me a baby" to "thank you for this child growing within me," after practicing gratitude for a pregnancy that hadn't yet manifested, something had changed. She'd stopped the desperate grasping energy of need and had begun to hold the peaceful certainty of already having, and 3 weeks earlier, she'd taken a pregnancy test that had come back positive. I don't know if it was the manifestation work or just timing or medical intervention finally working, Aoife said, her voice breaking with emotion. But what I do know is that I feel different. I don't feel like a desperate woman begging for something I can't have. I feel like a creator who has called forth what I desire. And whether or not the medical establishment would agree with that, I know in my bones it's true. I made this happen. I partnered with the divine to create this life. And that changes everything about how I understand myself and my power and what else might be possible. The women had embraced her, had celebrated with her, and Siobhan had felt Mary's presence in that moment, not as a distant statue or an intercessor in heaven, but as a thread of consciousness connecting women across 2,000 years, passing on the knowledge that each of them held creative power, that each of them was not a passive recipient of divine will but an active co-creator of their reality. That night, after everyone had gone home and Siobhan was tidying up the hall, she stood for a moment in the quiet space and spoke aloud to the woman she'd seen in the hologram, the real Mary, the teacher and manifester and keeper of dangerous knowledge. They buried what you taught, she said softly, but it's not staying buried. Not here. Not with us. We're remembering, bit by bit, what it means to be powerful, what it means to pray with authority instead of supplication. And I swear on whatever is holy I'll keep teaching it as long as I draw breath. The crystal in her pocket pulsed warm, and though she knew it was probably just responsive to her own electromagnetic field, she chose to believe it was affirmation, agreement, blessing from across the gulf of death in time and space. Now 18 months after Aelb's craft had ascended into the October sky, Siobhan's life bore almost no resemblance to the lonely, pain-filled existence she'd been living when the storm had brought an impossible visitor to her field. Her cottage was filled with activity, with women coming and going for individual guidance, with notebooks and teachings being shared, with laughter that had been absent for far too long. Her relationship with Mairead had deepened into the closeness they'd shared as girls, before life and distance and pride had wedged them apart. Her health had improved steadily, the chronic back pain easing as she stopped mentally rehearsing it every day, the insomnia fading as she replaced worry with gratitude before sleep. Money flowed more easily, not through any single windfall but through a dozen small streams, repair work neighbors asked her to do, a small inheritance from a distant aunt, a reduction in expenses that seemed to happen naturally, none of it dramatic, none of it overnight transformation, but all of it evidence that reality was indeed responsive to consciousness. When consciousness was directed with intention and held with elevated emotion, and more than the external changes, there was an internal shift that Siobhan valued more than all the rest. She no longer felt like a victim. She no longer felt powerless or abandoned or at the mercy of forces beyond her control. She felt, for the first time since perhaps childhood, like the author of her own story, like someone who had agency and choice and creative capacity. It was terrifying sometimes, that responsibility, that knowing that she could no longer blame God or fate or other people for her circumstances. But it was also profoundly liberating, because if she had created suffering unconsciously, she could create joy consciously, and that meant the future was not fixed but fluid, not predetermined but responsive to her thoughts and emotions and intentions. The lesson Siobhan learned, the lesson she taught her growing community of women, the lesson that Mary had tried to teach to millennia ago, before her words were twisted and buried, was this: you are not separate from the divine. You are not a powerless creature begging for mercy from an external God who may or may not choose to help you. You are an extension of creative consciousness, a point of awareness through which the infinite possibilities of the quantum field collapse into physical reality. Your thoughts are not ephemeral. They are energetic forces that shape the matter of your experience. Your emotions are not meaningless. They are the fuel that powers manifestation, that determines the frequency at which you vibrate, and therefore what you attract. Prayer is not supplication, not begging, not hoping an external power might take pity on you. Prayer is declaration, is feeling gratitude for what you desire as if you already possess it, is holding your consciousness at the frequency of your desired reality until physical circumstances shift to match. This is not heresy. This is physics. This is what Mary knew, what she tried to teach, what threatened those who profited from your powerlessness so much that they buried it for 2,000 years. But buried things have a way of surfacing when the time is right. When someone brave enough to dig is willing to face the dirt under their fingernails, and the resistance of those who prefer the truth stays hidden. And the time is right now, today, in your life, in this moment. You can choose to continue praying the old way, rehearsing your problems, focusing on lack, feeling powerless and abandoned. Or you can choose to pray the way Mary prayed, with absolute certainty, with elevated emotion, with gratitude for what is coming as if it has already arrived. The choice has always been yours. The church just never told you that. So here's what I'm asking you now. What I'm inviting you to do if this story has touched something true in your heart. First, subscribe to this channel because there's more to share. More stories of people who discovered that reality is far more responsive than we've been taught. That we have far more power than religion or science or culture has told us. Hit that bell so you'll know when new stories arrive. When new teachings surface, when new evidence emerges that you are not powerless, have never been powerless, were simply taught to believe you were. Second, drop a comment below and tell me about your own experience with prayer, with manifestation, with times when you asked for help and received none, or times when something impossible happened and you didn't know how to explain it. Share your stories of faith, your moments of doubt, your experiences with the miraculous or the mundane. This community we're building is stronger when we share our truths with each other, when we admit our struggles and celebrate our breakthroughs and support each other in learning to hold higher frequencies even when everything around us is pulling us toward fear and scarcity. Third, if you've ever experienced a miracle, a healing, a manifestation that defied explanation, share that story in the comments. Tell us what you did, how you felt, what you believed in that moment. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today, might be the evidence that convinces someone to try praying differently, to experiment with gratitude instead of supplication, to test whether reality really is responsive to consciousness. And finally, tell me what you learned from Siobhan's story, what resonated with you, what challenged you, what you might try differently in your own prayer practice going forward. Did this story shake your faith in the way you've always prayed, or did it strengthen your faith by offering you a new understanding of how prayer actually works? Write it down, make it concrete, because the act of articulating what you've learned helps anchor it in your consciousness, helps you remember it when doubt creeps in, helps you stay committed to the practice of manifestation even when results aren't immediate. Remember, Mary tried to teach this truth and it was buried for 2,000 years. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It surfaces when it's needed most, and God knows we need it now. Need to remember our own power. Need to stop waiting for external salvation and start creating internal transformation. Share this video with someone who's been praying for years without answers, with someone who feels abandoned by God, with someone who's ready to understand that they're not powerless victims but powerful creators. Let's bring this knowledge back to light, together. Let's remember what Mary really taught. Let's become the manifestors we were always meant to be.